Why are the religious just so clueless? I mean, every single video that we look at, you have a theist running around with a faith hat on, bumping into things because they just can't see reality. The moment that you try to explain to them what the hell they're doing wrong, they just stick their fingers in their ears because they just don't want to hear. What is wrong with these people? Let's try to find out. Welcome back to part 2 of the video, and I'm sorry to have to say this, but it's not going to get any better from here. But then again, when do religious videos ever improve? This is just another Has Science Disproved Christianity video over on the Questioning Christianity channel from somebody who is clearly not questioning Christianity. Why is that not a surprise? So anyway, let's get back to the action already in progress.
And beyond how belief in the Christian story opened the door for the scientific revolution, many of the subsequent discoveries of science, far from pointing away from God, actually make more sense in light of God's existence.
Such as... Now, I know this is just going to be an exercise in confirmation bias, but I'd really like to know. I see the religious making claims like this all the time, but they are racing to their emotionally comforting conclusion instead of just following the evidence to see where it leads. That's why none of these people make any sense at all. You can't just say, see, that proves God, if you haven't got any evidence for God's existence in the first place. Just because you really like the idea, that doesn't make God real. That's why the second that they give this a shot, I tell them to back it up without faith. Because faith isn't a verifiable path to objective truth. It doesn't get you to reality. It's just crap that you happen to like for emotional reasons. And that doesn't mean God done it. You have to prove God first.
Take, for instance, the discovery that our universe, space, time, matter, and energy, does not stretch back infinitely, but that it had an absolute beginning at some finite point in the past.
Now, that's debatable at best. Our particular instantiation of space-time seems to have had a beginning, but that doesn't mean that all of space and all of time, the entire cosmos, did. That's just an assertion on the part of the religious, and of the many cosmological models that we've come up with, virtually none of them would agree. But even if we were willing to grant that, not that I'm saying that we should, but even if we did, simply for the sake of argument, that still doesn't get them to any gods, much less the God that this guy really wants to reach. It might get them to a creator of some sort, but that doesn't prove that said creator had any of the properties stapled on by the religious, or that that creator was making things on purpose, or that that creator is still around today. It doesn't prove a personal deity done it. We're just left with, well, there might be something. What that something might be, I don't know, and neither do you. So stop pretending you do.
This discovery has strengthened one of the key premises in a famous philosophical argument for God's existence, the Cosmological argument.
That's been about as soundly debunked as any philosophical argument ever can be. It doesn't even mention any gods. It just says, well, the universe had a cause, and it just leaves it at that. The religious are the ones with the goalposts running around leaping to the unwarranted conclusions that it has to be a god, moreover, it has to be their god that done it. But that doesn't make it true. And this brings us right back to those questions that they have no answers for. How do they know it? And more importantly, how have they tested it to see if it actually stands up to any kind of critical muster? You don't just get to assign your pet cause to it because that's what you really want to be true. You have to back it up, and they're not even giving that a good faith attempt. If they get to do it, well, anybody else does too. invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. They did it. Prove me wrong. The lint at the bottom of my sock drawer. It did it. Why not? I mean, you have to actually demonstrate a direct causal link between what you're claiming is created and the thing you're claiming created it. And the religious, they're not even trying to do that. Wonder why.
Or take the discovery of the highly improbable calibration of the initial conditions of our universe, the ones that allow for intelligent life to develop.
What about it? Because here too, they're just playing goalpost bingo. What's the standard of intelligent life that they're demanding? Well, us. But why us? Because they have an emotional attachment to humanity. That doesn't mean that we're the only standard of possible intelligent life. I already went through some of that in another video. Humans could be entirely impossible, and the universe still could, hypothetically, produce intelligent life that wasn't us. Whether they like it or not, we're just not that hot. Get over yourselves.
This scientific data has led to the development of a teleological line of reasoning known as the fine-tuning argument.
Which is just nonsense once you realize that we aren't that special. It really falls apart the second that you give it 2 seconds of your time, since the universe is clearly not made for us. Even huge swaths of our own planet are deadly to humans without significant technological development. Beyond our world, we're screwed. How can the universe be finely tuned for life when only a very, very, very narrow temperate zone on a single planet that we are aware of in the universe will support us? If you go anywhere else, any of that stuff is going to kill us. This is why these people are such a ludicrous joke. They are not using the 2 brain cells that they have in their heads to come up with anything remotely rational. Not that they care, they just really want to believe.
Which, when combined with discoveries like the surprising way that abstract mathematics maps on to the physical world, or the way that biological organisms are comprised of irreducibly complex information systems.
Both of which are just nonsense. We made mathematics up. Why? Because we were seeking to understand the way the world around us works. In fact, as we learn more and find that our mathematical prowess isn't all that great, we've had to build entirely new mathematical models specifically because that's what it takes for the universe to make sense. Math isn't something that just exists absent the human brain. It's something that we made up for a specific purpose. It works because it was invented to work. As to a second point, that's utter nonsense too. Any claims that they make, from the eye to bacterial flagellum, science just looks at their claims, laughs hysterically, and then shows the formation of this supposedly irreducibly complex organism is absolutely nothing of the sort. The reason that these people fall for it is because they're stupid. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. They are looking for emotional comfort, desperate to get back to that conclusion that they made up in their heads because it makes them feel good, and they're just squinting at the world just so they can get where they desperately want to go. As I keep saying, they are not following the evidence that we have to the most logical conclusion that we can come up with. They are cherry-picking ideas and leading it around by the nose until they get where they want to be.
It seems our universe bears the unmistakable appearance of design.
No, it bears your interpretation of design, that's all. You are just inordinately attached to the idea of humanity and things as they are, and because that's the only way you can imagine things are going to be, you're just inventing bald rationalizations for why that is how it is. And I hate to say it, but you're just doing intelligence wrong. Knock it off.
You see, this ordered structure in our cosmos is what recently prompted Ard Louis, professor of theoretical physics at Oxford University, to observe in conversation with Morgan Freeman, I think the more we learn about the world, it points towards God. rather than less.
Maybe, and just hear me out here, but maybe instead of talking to an actor, you might try running some of that by, I don't know, actual scientists. They won't, of course, because it will reveal the utter absurdity of their beliefs, but that's probably a good idea. Better to talk to somebody who once played God in a couple of movies than to take your ideas to people who are just going to laugh in your face. Maybe you should just figure it out.
So far from burying God, if anything, it seems that science is resurrecting a rational belief in God.
Only if you know absolutely nothing at all coherent about science, which sadly I figure describes this guy to a T. If you don't understand it, you can't be wrong, right? Unfortunately, that's just not how it works. This is why the religious fare so badly in science, philosophy, logic, reason, anything but blind childish faith. They've got a goal in mind. It's also why they only want to talk to people who already believe. That means they don't have to face any of the hard questions that we would likely ask them, or the reality that they just don't have a single clue. Again, why are these people not trying to publish in peer-reviewed scientific journals? Because by and large, they aren't. They're not even trying. There have been surveys done that show that very, very, very few articles are even submitted by religious wingnuts. It's not that they're being turned down, it's that they're not even making an effort.
Now, while science can unearth a great deal about the history of our universe, when it comes down to it, disproving God is simply not in its purview.
That's really your fault, though, more than anything else. I mean, not his specifically, I didn't mean that, but religion has purposely picked up their toys and hidden them away beyond the ability of rational science to examine them. And they did that for a reason. They are terrified that if they leave their imaginary friends out there lying around where anybody else can find them, they're going to be proven wrong. Therefore, they simply declare arbitrarily and with no evidence whatsoever that my God can't be discovered. Well, that's not the slam dunk that you seem to think that it is. If that's the case, how did you find out about it? I mean, demonstrably. Well, my God told me he was real. Sure, okay. That sounds like you've got some problems upstairs. Those people over there, they say their God's real too. How about that? Well, yeah, but they're wrong. Funny, because they say the same thing about you. So that brings us right back to square one, and these people don't even know how badly they're losing. Kind of sad, right?
For as much as the tools of science are a tremendous gift to the tool belt of human knowledge, not every question has a scientific answer. Science has limits.
Any question that has to do with the existence, characteristics, or operation of the universe does. Anything that is in or interacts with the universe in any way, science is the only tool for the job. We have never, ever, not even once, found anything that demonstrably exists that cannot be described by science, and that includes your imaginary friend. If it was real, science could discover it. That science can't, and in fact, according to you lunatics, it is absolutely impossible for science to even try, that just shows what a complete load of nonsense it all is. You don't get to have it both ways, no matter how hard you try.
Being bound to purely observe the physical universe, science has no access to the metaphysical.
Because there's no rational reason to think that there is a metaphysical in the first place. Now, I guess it depends on what you mean by that, but I figure that he's talking about the supernatural, and that's just downright silly. In fact, I think that there's a lot of stuff talked about in philosophy that's also pretty damn ridiculous, and has absolutely no bearing whatsoever on anything, but maybe that's something for another video someday. Maybe. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. It gets right back to noodling your navel for no good reason, and I got no time for that.
It cannot ultimately adjudicate on the God question. It cannot move from describing what is to pontificating about what ought to be.
Nor can faith do anything of any value whatsoever. Just because you want something to be true, just because you have an emotional attachment to your beliefs, that doesn't mean that any of it is actually so. I am only interested in what is actually true. Saying, well, it sounds good to me, that doesn't mean anything. You need to have a way to move from your wishes and your dreams and your emotionally comforting fantasy life to actual demonstrable objective reality. And there are no mechanisms, not in religion and not in philosophy, to separate what you wish was true from what is actually true in any way that is verifiable or defensible. And that's the problem. You people just aren't living in the real world.
And it cannot repeat the past in order to prove what did or did not happen in history.
Which is why, whether you like it or not, and I know there's a lot of people out there who will hate this, but history really isn't all that important. Now, I know there's a lot of people out there that are going to hate that fact, especially all of the unemployed history majors, of which I know several, but there's really no point in knowing the exact specifics of the past. I mean, those who don't know anything about history are doomed to repeat it. We get that part. I'm talking about Joe Blow from Kokomo stood on this exact spot and said these exact words. Who cares? Big deal. It doesn't teach us anything about where we're going, and since we're not going to be going backwards anytime soon, so what?
So as soon as we step into questions of metaphysics, ethics, or even human history, we simply move beyond the authority of the sciences to speak.
And who says otherwise? This is where I really get sick of people who are looking for authority and lack the capacity to act on their own accord. They can't think for themselves. And that's a real problem these days, not just among the religious. People running around screaming, well, tell me what to do! Tell me what to do! Figure it out! Now, granted, most of that comes from a lack of credible parenting, people who have never had to make any decisions on their own because their parents never allowed them to even try, and certainly they never allowed them to fail, but that's a big problem too, and beyond the scope of this video. Sorry. It's not a particularly new problem, though, and we will see throughout history that the religious have always wanted guidance from above because it's just too scary to have any of that weight on their own shoulders. People just don't want to be responsible. Therefore, they just pass the buck. Well, God told me to do X, or the devil made me do it. The second you take away those convenient excuses, people tend to freak out. Maybe it's just time everybody grew the hell up.
Ultimately, where many people who pose this science objection get tripped up is by confusing two different types of explanations. Suppose I were to ask you, well, why are you watching this video? And you answered, well, the pixels on my screen are emitting light, which then passes through the lenses of my eye. There, the images and the arrangement of letters are translated into electrochemical signals, which, along with the sound emitted and then picked up by the reverberations in my eardrums, are interpreted in my brain via centers for language and memory, forming them into coherent thoughts that convey meaning to my conscious mind.
And that was a really long way to go, only for me to tell you that you're wrong. Because the question that you asked was why, and the explanation that you proposed was how. Those are two entirely different things. And this is a problem that a lot of people seem to have, although around here we see it a lot from the religious. They don't seem to know what those two things are or how they're different. They're looking for meaning and purpose, not description and mechanism, which is what he just described. If you asked me why I watched this video, I'd tell you. I watched it not only because it was suggested to me, thanks to Jon B once again for that, but I honestly wanted to know what he had to say. Your video posed a question. Has science disproved Christianity? I wanted to see how you answered that question, and sadly, you've done an absolutely terrible job. I'm not really surprised at that because virtually every theist that we look at is piss poor at everything, but I had to give you a chance, and now that I've seen your content, all I can do is just roll my eyes and call you an idiot because that's what you've proven yourself to be. Maybe, just maybe you shouldn't do that. Just a helpful hint.
Well, I might be impressed at your answer, at your wit, but you haven't really answered the question that I asked.
Neither have you. I mean, I did, but I suspect you wouldn't care if you even bothered to watch the video, and frankly, I don't think most theists have the guts to watch things critical of their echo chamber. Can we get anywhere remotely close to a point here? Because that would sure be nice.
You gave me a mechanistic explanation using science. You explained how you are watching. But what I was really looking for was a personal explanation or an explanation of agency. Not the how, but the why. To which the answer might be something like, because I'm searching for answers to life's deepest questions.
No, I'm not. I'm watching you make a complete fool of yourself. However, I think I get what he's trying to get at, so let's just address that. I gave you my personal answer, which I figure you won't like, but there it is anyhow. And now you're just trying to be a condescending jackass and thinking that people are going to answer in a specific way so that you can make the points you want to make. The fact is, it's all science all the way down. I watched your video based on conclusions that I made in my brain, caused by electrochemical impulses that caused me to click on your video, yada yada yada. See, that's the problem here, because you're assuming that science and philosophy are two entirely different things, and they're really not. It all comes from the same place, and that place isn't supernatural in any way, at least not that we have ever seen any demonstrable evidence for. You have just reached an entirely intellectually unjustifiable conclusion based on the chemicals rattling around in your brain, and now you think you're special. But you're not. The one who is doing this all wrong is you. Knock it off.
You see, the how and the why, the mechanism and the agency, are not competing explanations. They are perfectly complementary. Because as much as we can learn about how you take in videos from science, we can learn nothing about why you are watching them from that same enterprise. For that, you have to open your mouth and speak.
Yes, you can. Psychology is a science. It's not a physical science, but it is a science all the same. You can look at neuroscience, for example, of which there are a lot of different varieties, and all of this can tell you why you do the things that you do, what impact your past, your beliefs, your brain structure, etc., have on the ideas that are just rattling around in your head right now. Unfortunately, you'd much rather believe in imaginary father figures in the sky to explain it, and that's just delusion on your part. Just because you want it to be true, that doesn't make it true. I shouldn't have to repeat that as much as I do, but there you go.
And the same is true when it comes to science and God. Science can tell us a great deal about how the universe operates, but it cannot tell us why it exists.
That assumes that there is a why. It presumes that there is a purpose to it. Demonstrate that purpose in some independently verifiable way. You can't. You can just assume it because it strikes an emotional chord in your brain. But that doesn't make it true. You are looking for something that doesn't demonstrably exist just because you wish that it did. And in so doing, you are making a complete fool of yourself. Maybe you ought to rethink that.
For that, God has to open his mouth and speak. And when it comes to God and the Christian story where God speaks, I know of no serious scientific reason to disbelieve anything Jesus said about who you are, why you are here, and where you are going.
But you haven't proven that any of that ever happened at all. That is, yet again, just an assertion on your part. It's a belief, but beliefs don't mean anything without rational justifications. You're just spouting emotionally comforting stories that you read about in a book that I have no reason whatsoever to take seriously. Flapping your lips doesn't make objective truth. Come on back when you have some of that.
If anything, science should give you some good reasons to tune into him more carefully.
And it would if there was any evidence at all that God was real. See, here's where the religious entirely miss the mark, and I know I've said it before, but they'll say, well, God can't be detected by science. And then they expect people to just believe it anyhow. Why? What other thing in your life would you ever allow that kind of claim to affect? Probably nothing, at least I hope not. You can't just come up with tall tales about imaginary friends just because you really like the idea and think that everybody else is just going to fall into line. It doesn't work that way. The whole video is all about, well, Jesus this and God that. But never once did he ever stop to show that any of these things were actually real. Yet, if a Hindu were to say, well, Krishna this and Brahma that, there's no chance in hell that he'd just go along for the ride, right? Of course not. If I made claims about Bobo the tree god, would he just nod and accept that as true? No, he'd ask for evidence, at least I hope he would, and nothing would happen until I provided it. They can't see that they're the hypocrites. They have an automatic double standard for their imaginary friends. Just because it sounds really good to them, it's got to be true for everyone, but it doesn't work like that. And this is why any theological discussion needs to hinge immediately on, is that God real, and how do you know it? How can you prove it to me? If you can't, then there's just no discussion to be had. You might as well be talking about Harry Potter. Come on back when you have some actual evidence to provide. I don't mean, well, it sounds good to me. I mean evidence. Until then, you're just wasting everyone's time. So anyway, thanks once again to Jon B for suggesting the video. If you see anything out there that you want me to take a look at, just post a direct link in the comments on any video, or you can send me an email. It's in the description. And thanks for hanging around for this very, very, very long and pretty dry talk. Anyway, I'll catch you all next time.
Bum